All right. Hello again. Welcome back to the DragonCon Digital Media Track. My name is Bobby Blackwolf. I've been a longtime podcaster, 15 years doing a video game podcast, and I am currently on the Voice of Geeks Network. This panel is actually a sequel, repeat, reboot, I don't know what you want to call it, of a panel that we did last year called Video Didn't Kill the Radio Star. And it's about doing an audio podcast on video. And the reason I really wanted to do this panel was this track at DragonCon used to be called the podcasting track. And it was all about podcasters getting together and talking about doing their audio podcast. And over time, we have morphed along with the digital landscape to now become the digital media track to include streamers, because now it's so much easier to stream video than it used to be. And a lot of podcasts have morphed into doing live video, but there are still a whole lot of audio podcasts out there and audio podcast listeners, because it's really hard and you really shouldn't be watching a video while you're driving. And so what I've got gathered here are a bunch of longtime podcasters who also do live video content. And we're going to talk about the differences between doing an audio podcast and doing the exact same podcast on video, how you don't alienate any listeners, and a little bit more about that transition for if you are currently have figured out, or as much as you can, the audio podcast way of doing things. Do you want to give yourself a new challenge? And some of the things that we learned going from audio to video. So I am going to have my panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Tony P. Henderson's BFF, Rob Roberts.
Well, hi, Bobby, and hi, Tony, and hi, everybody out there watching the track. I am Rob Roberts, and I also host a video game podcast, also on the Voice of Geeks Network, vognetwork.com. My show is called Orange Lounge Radio, and we believe it's the longest-running video game podcast out there, because it actually started as a live show on Live 365 years ago, 2002. So we just celebrated 18 years of weekly shows this last June. So, and we were doing audio only for a very long time, and made the transition to doing our show on Twitch in December of 2018. So it's been about a year and a half, but we do still consider ourselves an audio podcast at its core. We're just one that happens to do that on video. And I think we'll talk about probably some of those nuances a little bit later throughout the panel. You know, are you still audio? Are you video? You know, what is your identity, right?
Mm-hmm. And then also we have Tony P. Henderson's BFF, Bill.
Well, I guess we're going to have to fight over Tony later on, Rob. So I'm looking forward to that.
He doesn't care about me. He only cares about the cat. It's fine.
That's true. It's all about the kitties. So I'm Bill. I host a bunch of different podcasts. I host Nintendo Switchcraft, which is a Nintendo news show. I host a Stadia podcast called StadiaCast, and I also have a revolving door guest podcast where people come on and talk about their favorite games of all time. Rob's been a guest on it. It's called 143 Pixels. They're all audio podcasts, but you know, two of those shows, the news-related shows, I do those live streaming on video as well.
And then somebody who Tony P. Henderson hasn't met yet, but will hopefully be BFFs with soon, Ro.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Rochelle Hines, also known as Black and Pat Ro. I actually founded 14 years ago an audio podcast with my sister called the Eshcast, where we talked about video games and anime. And we are sure that we are actually the first audio podcast about both of those topics that was actually founded and hosted by Black women. So we've done that for 14 years. We actually wrapped that podcast almost a year ago to start our new venture, Black and Pat, here on Twitch, where we are streaming a bi-weekly podcast on diversity, inclusion, and representation, and then playing games and having just fun community nights. So I'm excited to be here to talk about that experience.
So what made you, let's go back to the beginning. What made you want to start podcasting? And I'll actually just stay here with Ro. You tell me, what made you want to start doing the audio podcast 14 years ago?
Sure. So 14 years ago, I was always an AV nerd. I was in drama in college and in high school, and I always loved talk shows to begin with. And I wanted a way to use the skills that I had in production somehow. And I'd become a big fan of sites like and shows like Dig Nation, and started listening and finding a lot of different podcasts on video games because I'm a gamer at my core. And the big thing that I found was that there wasn't any show out there that had people like me on it. As I looked at the landscape, there was, token female here or there that was, really like the ha 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 voice in the background, but not really contributing a lot. There were few and far between. I did find a couple, but I just decided between my sister and I, we crack each other up every week talking on the phone about what games we were playing or what animes we were watching. I was like, we can do this. I can be Dig Nation. I could be better than Dig Nation, actually, because we're funny. So let's commit. Let's do this. And it became, for my sister and I, like the weekly date for us to be together after I'd moved away from home. And it then grew out of that. We found an audience. They liked what we did. And so we just kept riding it because it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Bill, why did you start?
When I was a kid, I always Adrian Cronauer was like my hero because from Good Morning Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I always wanted to have my own radio show. So much so that when I was a kid, I would listen to like my cassette tapes, and then between the songs, I would do those stupid like, hey, this is that was this song, and then this is the next song. I always wanted to do that, and then when podcasting started, I would be listening to podcasts and interacting with the hosts and stuff. And I thought, this is amazing. But I never really jumped in until, I don't know, like 5 years ago. So like, you guys are the veterans. I'm the new guy basically. But I didn't really jump in until about 5 years ago. And I decided that I just, none of my in real life friends really care about video games all that much, and so I wanted to have a place to just keep talking about that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to make a podcast about video games.
Rob, you've been doing this for a long time, even kind of predating podcasts.
A little bit, yeah.
So why did you start?
I think kind of like Ro was saying, I was always a little bit of an AV nerd. It was something that kind of always interested me. And I think that pushed me in the direction. In high school, I actually had a public access show, which is a concept that doesn't really exist anymore because of YouTube and TikTok and stuff. But that was something I did in high school. And then getting into college, I got into college radio. But I got into trouble in college radio because I dared to play the Spice Girls during my show. And you know how in college radio, they're all very edgy and very alternative and so forth. So I think I kind of learned through that whole experience, maybe structure isn't for me, and maybe going into commercial radio and commercial television, maybe that's not quite for me. And then it was really my buddy Travis Donovan, who was starting a Rocky Horror Picture Show pre-show through Live 365, that invited me over to his house to do like a pre-show before we actually went to the theater and then did Rocky Horror Live. And I think, again, kind of similar to the story Ro was telling, we cracked each other up. Like nobody was listening, but we had such a fun time thinking they were. And we did some of the most insane types of like pranks and silly things that like 19 and 20-year-olds do. And we had a good old time with that show. And it also showed me, and with all respect to my pod daddy, Travis, any idiot can broadcast. And that was something I really learned from that. And so that kind of led to, well, we really like games, and we really like gaming, and we really like this community. And we were all fans of a game. And when I say we, myself and my co-hosts, Dark Sakura or Jamie and Matt Loki, we were all fans of Dance Dance Revolution and really into the music-based video games. And so we wanted to create a show kind of about that community, similar to what Understation Live, the show I did with Travis, brought to the Rocky Horror community. And fast forward 18 years later, and our show is still going. We're not exclusively about Dance Dance Revolution and music games anymore, but we were definitely born of that community, and still kind of like, that's still kind of like our soul.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I started getting into this was kind of a mishmash of everybody else, except part of mine was guilt. I had the opportunity to do the college radio station. It was handed to me on a silver platter, and I didn't do it. And that regret actually stayed with me. And then when I was doing some stuff on Live 365, and I'm like, oh, I could just do this myself. I don't need to have an FCC license or any of that training or anything, and I can do it and mess up all on my own. And then I started doing that, and then I just got into a rhythm of a schedule and got consistency. And now I don't know what I do with my Sunday nights. Like this weekend's going to be weird because I'm going to be here and not doing what I normally do on Sunday nights, but I don't know what I'd be doing on my Sunday nights anymore. It'd be really weird if I quit. So the next question I've got is we talked about why we started doing the podcast, and we all kind of started in audio, but why did you make the decision to move to video, and why is that what direction you're going in? So, Rob, I'm going to start with you.
It's something I kind of wish I'd gotten on a little sooner. And in some ways we did. We actually started broadcasting Orange Launch Radio on Justin TV, to kind of tell you how long ago that was. And I remember that probably would have been around 2007, because I remember the Final Fantasy 13 demo in my mind was something we had played on there. But I don't think we'd found the right rhythm yet. And Justin TV, gaming hadn't really broke through yet, and streaming. And I don't think we found the right formula on how to do that. And we kind of felt the video at that time was kind of burdening the show. So we kind of walked away from it. And when we had to change studios and we didn't have the big open space anymore, we were broadcasting in a much tighter space. We were like, you know what, we're going to leave the video behind. We're a radio show. We don't need the video. Fast forward to about probably 10 years after that fact, now Twitch is really taking off, and all these other, things are taking off. And I was finding that it was harder to tell people how to listen to my show live. I could say, well, you can get an app called TuneIn. Have you heard of Shoutcast? Do you know how to add a stream into iTunes? And it was just one of those, this is too complicated. And I started to realize this is part of the reason why the live experience is losing listeners. It's too hard to listen to the show. So something like Twitch, Twitch is available on mobile phones. Twitch is available on gaming consoles. Twitch is available on the desktop. It's everywhere. And so, especially when you're asking gamers, which is my audience, do you know how to watch a Twitch channel? The answer is almost always yes. So it kind of led to that conclusion of, what, we need to get to this because it's going to be easier to tell people how to find us.
Now, Ro, you you had an audio podcast, and then that finished its run, and you've started a new show that is on video. So why is the new? Why did you decide that you were going to do live video for your new venture?
Sure. So for us, we had been wanting at Electric Sisterhood for 4 years to do video. And we even tested a few things with some giveaways and things like that. And the platforms at the time, frankly, to be honest, were not very welcoming of non-cis white gendered male folks. And we had some really horrible experiences that jaded us against video. So we just dropped it and said, we're just going to stick with audio and be safe in our little bubble here, and that'll be okay. But as we started getting to what really felt naturally like the end of Electric Sisterhood, the podcast, the Eshcast, which was both my sister and I, we'd gotten older than when we had started the podcast, and we really wanted to have more interactivity. Our show was a canned show. It wasn't live. And so we kind of had to wait for feedback after every episode. And there were so many more things that we wanted to talk about and experiences that we wanted to have to actually interact with the community, to put questions out there and in real time get answers back, and maybe drive some deep conversations around diversity and inclusion and representation, which are very important issues to both of us, especially in the space that we're in right now. It didn't make sense to do that in audio because I could not figure out how to have that live interaction. Very much like Rob said, it's very difficult to find a live way to deliver audio and then have some kind of interaction in real time. I couldn't figure that out. And so we just decided at this point, if we're going to have conversations about representation and diversity, then we needed to be on screen. People needed to see that we were Black women having these conversations about representation in the entertainment industry and in video games, and to be able to see our passion, or in all honesty, to see our pain. And hopefully that would drive real meaningful interaction.
Now, Bill, I know that you kind of did you start off doing both audio podcast and video at the same time, or did you start off doing one and transferring to the other?
Well, as far as like, I actually started streaming on Twitch before I started a podcast. I was doing I would log in and I would play a video game. Mostly I was streaming on Twitch because I felt like most of the time I would play massively multiplayer games or, that kind of game. And I would have people to interact with while I was playing it, but I was never playing any single player games. So I decided to start a Twitch channel so that I would have people to talk to and I wouldn't get as bored playing single player games. I just don't have a very good attention span. So I started that. And then I decided that I wanted to make a podcast, and it was weird. Like, I had a Discord channel and I was recording the podcast, and I don't remember if it was a listener who said, "Hey, can you put it in the Discord channel?" And I said, "Oh, sure." So I went into the Discord channel. I made a channel where only I could talk and other people could listen. And I did the podcast that way for a while. And it took far too long for me to actually connect the dots that I could just do this on Twitch, because I was already streaming on Twitch. So then finally I said, "Oh, you know what, guys, is it okay with you if I do the show live and like you can see me while I'm doing the show?" And they said, "Yeah, do that." And that's what I've been doing ever since. One of my shows, I stream that on Twitch, and one of my other shows, I stream that on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, and for me, it was this move to video was just because it was getting harder for people to find us on Shoutcast. And this guy named Bill came in to my chat room. He's like, "Why aren't you doing this on Twitch? Why aren't you doing this on Twitch?" So we finally woke up. We probably should have done it a couple years earlier, but we finally made the jump, and I'm really excited about it. We are taking questions in the DC Digital Media Twitch channel. It's actually, I'm using all the same stuff I would normally use on Sunday night. It's just pointing over there. There's a great question. I'm going to get to it next. It's going to kind of follow up this question. But I want to ask mostly for, you guys that, or for all y'all that have had to do both audio, podcast, and video. What more do you have to worry about when you're doing your podcast live on video than you do if you're just pre-recording it? Like, what are some of the specific things that you now have to worry about that you didn't before when you were just doing a podcast? And I'll start with Rob.
Well, quite simply, the fact that there's a camera. And I know that sounds like, of course, right? But you'd be surprised, because when we were doing Orange Lounge Radio for so long, the three of us were sitting in a room. But because there were three of us, that, one person might be reading a story and one person might be interacting, and somebody else might completely have their head down doing something else, bringing up the next story, doing something, whatever. So when we did that first episode on Twitch, I was, a little nervous, because I kind of wanted to be like, look, we're still a radio show, but we're on Twitch, okay? And then I asked some friends for feedback after that first episode, like, what did you think? And it was kind of like, well, it was fine, but like, you guys were never like looking at each other. And like, every time Loki was telling a story, Rob, you were like on your phone and looking somewhere else. And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, that's how the show works. But it kind of was like, oh gosh, now that we are on video, if I don't look interested in and it's never that like I wasn't interested, it's just we learned how to multitask really good. But if I don't look interested, then that's not going to send the message across to the listeners that it's interesting. So I kind of had to adjust some of the ways that I multitask during the show. And even still, it's kind of like the biggest challenge is like the camera's over here. And, even in doing this, the camera's up here, but you guys on Zoom are down here. So I'm like trying to look at the camera, but I also want to look at you guys on Zoom. And it can be a very tricky balance. And in my studio for OLR, it's even worse because my monitor's over here, because it wasn't set up originally to do video. And I'm going to really just have to redo the whole thing when we move to our next space, hopefully within the next year. But yeah, it's the simple fact that there is a camera and you have to be aware of it.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on that as well. Is the camera is the big thing for me as well, because I actually, and people probably don't understand this, I've actually had to learn how to look at the camera and not make it look too weird. And I'm still working on this. And it's because I actually do have a really bad lazy eye. I've got amblyopia, strabismus. I think I got both of them. I don't know. And astigmatism and stuff like that. So I have to learn, like, which eye do I look at the camera with? So my other eye doesn't like go out this way, and I fail. And it happens. I watch my video and I'm like, oh, there goes the lazy eye. It's wandering off. And so I've kind of tried to have to train myself how to look at the camera. And then also look over and read the story and read chat over here, because I've got two monitors. And so sometimes I'm not looking at the camera, I'm reading a story and stuff. And I just kind of explained a way that you're actually just watching me do a radio show. The reason I didn't want to do video for a long time is I didn't think anybody wanted to watch me just sit here in front of a microphone and do this. So that was kind of the big thing for me. And then the other thing for me is now we've got on-screen graphics over at VOG. We've actually got like a ticker on the side, kind of like the old Sports Center, which like lists the headlines on the side. And then as they would go to the next thing, it would scroll up. We've actually built that for VOG. So now I have to really pre-plan and fill that out before we go. And then I've got a Stream Deck that I hit a button. And then also now I've got lights on my face, which I didn't have before. So that was some of the stuff that I had to add in while still trying to make it sound seamless to the audio podcast interface. Bill, I'm going to take this to you. What more do you have to do when you're doing a video a podcast talk show on video than you would if it was only audio?
Oh man, the technical aspects of video are so much more than audio. Like if I wanted to do just an audio podcast, I would grab my phone, I would plug a microphone into the bottom of it, I would record my voice, edit out the bad parts, and publish it. That would be so much easier. But then when you're dealing with a video, you've got to have, well, first off, always you got to have great audio. That has to come first before anything else. But then you got to have a good camera. You got to have good lights. You have to have something interesting to look at behind you. And if you stay on the same camera shot for too long, people get disinterested. And it's not because what you're talking about is not necessarily interesting. It's that their mind starts to wander because they're looking at the same thing over and over. You look at TV shows. TV shows are cutting the camera like every 15 seconds or something like that. So yeah, then you get out your Stream Deck and you're hitting buttons in order to show people what it is that you're talking about, while keeping in mind that that there are people who are not watching this. Mm-hmm. So now you have to be cognizant of the idea that I need to be able to show stuff to make the video production as good as it can be without dropping the ball for the people who are listening to the podcast. And for me, that there's far more people that listen to my show than show up for the live show, because the live show, like, well, that's live. And if you're busy when I'm doing it, then you can't come and watch.
Yeah. No, and I've had to learn that too, is like I will narrate what I'm doing because it's so easy, because I can say, oh, yeah, everybody look behind here and everybody sees this. But like if you're listening to this panel, you have no clue what I just said. And so I'm like, all right, so I'm going to narrate. I have a tower of power over here of 4 different sized Nintendo consoles. And this is what this one is. And I have to remember to do that. And the video audience is like, yeah, we can see that. We don't need it. And I'm like, but it's for everybody else, the majority that are listening to it on audio. And when I play a video, which also extends my setup time, is because now I'm queuing up videos that I know I'm going to call during the show. And I'm like, all right, now we're showing a video and it's showing this, and this is what we're seeing in the video, and actually having to do more narration. So Ro, what have you had to do that's different, production wise, and how have you set it up to do Black Compat versus Electric Sisterhood?
Everything that you guys have talked about was a huge deal. I knew that getting into video was going to be more work, that we were going to have to be more mindful of what is it that we're talking about? How do we want to convey this to the audience? How do we keep it interesting? How do we remember that now we're on camera? So the fidgety things that I would do, or frankly, when my sister would be talking, previously on our audio podcast, if I really wasn't interested in whatever she was talking about, you wouldn't see it because it was just audio. So I could be doing other things and it would be great. If I flubbed a line or she flubbed a line, we fix it in post. It's not a big deal. That is a completely different ball game now that we're doing video, because there's no instant do-over. We were doing a podcast and we went to go do our outs, and I called her by her old pen name on our website, and she's like, "No, you're not Pandalicious." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, that's right. Like, this isn't the space that we're in, and I don't get to just edit that and go back and nobody know about it or ever hear about it." So it really was us taking the step back to take the time to plan out, okay, what is it that we want to do? How do we want to do it? And it's part of the reason why there was such this huge gap between when we ended the podcast and we jumped into video, because I had to gear up. I had to start kitting out my office so I would have something entertaining behind me. I actually have a dual computer 4-monitor setup here. I'm in the process of soundproofing, but I live someplace where it's really humid, so it keeps falling off of my walls. But I had to get light kits, and I had to, figure out how to create scenes that would be interesting and how I wanted to switch between them. What would be a schedule that we could keep up and do enough content that it would be a filling amount of time to allow people to find us, because that was the other thing that was very different. When I put out our audio podcast, we knew how many people subscribed to the feed, so we knew how many people were going to be getting those episodes when they came out, and we had a pretty good idea of how many people actually would interact back with us after the episode went out. We're now putting out content where I don't know if anybody is going to show up when we go live or how many people are going to see it afterwards, and that's a unique thing because I still have to show up and engage when that, counter says that there's nobody in the chat, nobody watching the stream. I still have to be as on it entertaining for when they do come through. And so that was a big shift, and, also a big kind of slap on the ego real quick of like, hey, you have to restart this. You're earning it back, and you have to be now entertaining the entire time through.
Now, I do want to say we have some breaking news in the chat. Manda says, I am a very interesting person. Breaking news came in the chat room. I have to read it. I don't make the rules. Actually, I do. So I made that rule and I had to read it. So we have a question from Kruggles in the chat over at Twitch. Any advice for transitioning to video for a serial podcast versus episodic? Feels like there's more security in episodic to fill in gaps around scheduling issues and such. Whereas for a serial podcast, we'd be worried about maintaining our consistency throughout the story. So I'm actually, since that's kind of an open-ended question, I'm going to do exactly what I told the panelists I wouldn't do. And it's going to be a toss-up, and I'm going to see who picks it up first. And this is why I usually call on people. Rob?
I was just saying, I think it might be a little difficult for this particular group of panelists because I think we all produce episodic, so we don't really have a familiarity with serial. So we kind of have to take a guess. And the best thing I could kind of say to that with answering from the episodic perspective, consistency is super duper important, especially when it comes to building your audience, building your show. You've got to be regular. You've got to be consistent. So is it necessarily a bad thing to take an episodic approach to a serial program?
Mm-hmm.
Just to establish that regularity and make sure, the audience is making time for you at a certain, day of the week at a certain time or what have you. I think that is very important, is that we're very fortunate at OLR that we've been doing our show so long. And Bobby just made the same joke too, because, it's no secret our shows are kind of back to back on the same night, is that it's kind of one of those, I don't know what we would do without this show on Sunday night. And we're very, blessed to have listeners that are kind of in the same boat. Like, this is my Sunday night. This is that thing that I do, because they've carved out that space for us. And we're very lucky for that. Yes. And so I think, in establishing your audience, you're going to want to make sure you're regular and doing things consistent so that the audience cuts out a space for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that because it's, for the consistency, if you're doing something that's more serial, make sure that you upload the video to YouTube, which is something that I know I don't do and Rob doesn't do. But that way, since it's more serialized, that way people can find and easily access the video portion if they want to go back to it. So that is the advice kind of I would give on that. Anybody else want to jump in before I move on to another question?
I would say that just be okay with mistakes. When you're pre-recording stuff and you mess up, it is so easy to just do punch and roll. You go back and you fix it in post. But if you're going to do it live, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing over and over, and you can stop the show right there and say, I'm going to go back and fix that. I'm going to delete this segment and start from scratch. I do that so many times. I record my show, takes me about an hour, and the show is usually about a half an hour. And that's because between segments, I'm interacting with chat, or I've recorded a segment and I've said, you know what, that segment is a big old steamer. I'm gonna redo it. And chat laughs at me and says, Bill, what's wrong with you? But I've done that a million times. Be okay with mistakes, but be okay with other people seeing your mistakes, even if you're going to fix them.
I mean, Rob, our favorite phrase is what? Live radio, boys and girls?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I mean, it's happened. Things happen. It's how you respond to those things. Well, there's another phrase, but it's not 10 o'clock yet, so I can't say it. But you all know it's the brown word. So things happen, and if they happen, it's all about how you respond to it. If you're like, I just made a mistake, then it's like you're shining a huge spotlight on it.
And then they're all going to clip it.
Exactly. Yes. And because that's a thing people can do now. But if it's like, oh, whoops, hold on, let's do another take. And then just, and then that's why we might joke, live radio boys and girls, I know you tune in to see the screw ups, and they do.
Yes.
That's a big part of it. But, it's you roll with it like, haha, these things happen. Okay, let's do another take.
And you can use those screw ups, those clips that people make, as a way to market your podcast. If somebody gets a really good thing where you've screwed up and made a goofy error, you can take that clip, post it on Twitter, and maybe somebody's going to see it who's never heard of your show, and they're going to click on it and find your show.
Yeah. Why do so many movies roll flubs over the credits at the end? Because they're funny.
Yeah.
Yep. Ro, did you want to add anything to this?
The thing that I would add is just doubling down on the consistency thing. For us, we wanted to take kind of a dual approach with Black and Pat. So the idea of having something that was serialized, in our case, we look at our tribunal, our podcast is actually our serial piece. When we sat down, we planned out the first 8 months of topics. So that is kind of like our baseline serial. And then everything else on top of that, we think of as our episodic. So our Let's Play stuff, our community night stuff, random streams that we throw in there to just be ourselves and maybe have a break and enjoy some time with people. Those are the other pieces, because we know that we need both, right? For what we want to do, because we are starting from zero in this place. Like, we didn't promote on Esh when we left that, hey, we're going to be doing this other thing, come along with us. We literally sliced it and went, bye. So it's really been humbling, but I would say the consistency is really the baseline, right? Because whatever flubs happen, mistakes happen, scheduling issues that pop up, and you can't do something else, when you have built your foundation on your consistency, then it's not such a big deal, and you can figure out whatever you have to do. So if my sister, who does Let's Plays on Fridays, she can't do a Let's Play, I'm already set with being able to jump in and pick up that time. Like, we have figured out for us before we started what our contingency plans are, so that we're never panicked, and we have that foundation of, we know what we're doing, we know where we're going. We just haven't figured out exactly like how we're going to get it like perfect for us.
So Struggles also has another great question. Another question. What is a good line for background between cluttered, like what I have behind me, and interesting, like what Bill has behind him? Is that something measurable? So I'm going to throw this to Bill first.
Well, no, it's not measurable. It's different for everybody. I would say it also depends on what kind of camera you have. If you've got like a fancy camera like mine, then the stuff that's in your background is not nearly as important, because there's going to be a bokeh on it and it's going to be blurry, and people aren't going to be able to make it out nearly as well as they can if you're using like a regular webcam then everything behind you is crystal clear because the depth of focus is so different. All of this is stuff that you have to learn when you're doing video shows. What I would say is the best thing that you can do in order to make that behind you good is to make it what you want to look at, and it just be like everybody else will fall in love with it too, because I love all of this stuff on the shelves behind me. It's a bunch of, for those of you who are can't see it because it's blurry, it's just a bunch of old Nintendo consoles. I love having that stuff, so make it about you. It doesn't matter if it's cluttered.
Yeah, and I actually have behind me, there's a space to my left, the camera's right, that I usually will put like something that is relevant to the topic that night. So if like there was a big Halo announcement, I'll actually pull out old boxes of Halo games and put them over here. Or I'll put, some Nintendo games or some older games. Right now, I've actually got a whole bunch of Nintendos because I did a whole segment on the Lego NES, which is back here. It's one of the 4 Nintendos I have over here. And then behind me on the right is kind of just where I keep like VR headsets. So I've got all these googly eyes everywhere, which are all VR headsets. But I try to position things that I know is going to be on camera, something that's a little interesting, and see if people can make those out. Ro, what do you do with your background?
So I have my light kit, which I don't have on right now because it's super powerful. And I'm still working on actually getting my lighting right. But my space is, to Bill's point, it's what I want to look at and what I enjoy. So I have a tower of power. I'm close in right now on my webcam, so you can't see it, that has all the lanyards from every show that I've gone to that's video game wise, all the collectibles that I've gotten. When I'm streaming games, I'm actually on this computer over here. So I have a different camera setup that actually looks directly at my lights that create like a nice little halo behind my head. And I've got all of my games in a nice little tower here because I want to be surrounded by the things that I'm passionate about and that I love. And I hope that like, as people watch, like they'll see things, and sometimes people will call them out in chat. So I've had people be like, oh my God, you like God of War? And I'm like, yes, let's talk about it. It really is about creating a space that I enjoy being in because, right now, about 4 hours a week, I'm in here talking with people. And, as we move forward, the plan is for me to be here 6 hours a week. So the space needs to be unique to me and a place that I want to be in and I'm energized in. And if that happens with me, hopefully that translates through the camera and gets to the audience, and then they'll be energized by it as well.
And Rob, I know like right now we've got the live looking at the Pulse Bar at the Marriott, but normally on OLR, you've got like posters and since unfortunately, because of all this, you've had to socially distance OLR.
Yes.
You've started putting, audience members on the couch that's next to you. So tell me a little bit about your background. And also I know you've redecorated your background in the middle of a show when a poster did something you didn't like.
Okay, so yes, you said a lot there. Let me try to get through it.
Yeah.
So right now I'm not in the space where I do OLR. So I have the green screen in here. It's kind of like Ro has like the 2 camera setup. I have 2 completely different spaces for streaming. So this is like the green screen, and this is where I would stream like personal video games and stuff. For OLR, and I think a key thing that both Run Jump Stomp and Ro said that I think is very important is that your background is kind of going to establish your branding. Like what they see behind you is going to say a lot about what you're doing. Now, OLR is in a unique place where before all of this, 2020 happened, we were doing our show all in the same spot. So I felt that the background was not as much of a focus for us because you had myself, you had Loki, we were interacting with each other. Our other co-host, Dark Sakura, she doesn't always like to be on camera. So we have things positioned where she kind of, if she wants to be, she can get on camera. And we also do the Dr. Claw perspective where when she points, she will say, you can see her hand, basically. So it's kind of funny. But we also kind of wanted to establish it's a lounge, it's a hangout spot, it's that type of thing. And so that's why we have like a couch and all those things that you were kind of talking about. But as you mentioned, because of COVID and things, we've had to mix it up a little bit. And now I'm in the studio, but my co-hosts are using Discord, and that's how we're doing the show right now. And they're kind of doing the things they want to do. Loki likes to show the games that he's either working on or just kind of obsessed with at the moment. Dark Sakura is really into dressing up. She's a drag nun on the side, so she loves to wear a new wig every week. And that's, again, it's about showing your personality through your background and your things like that. And that's all, it all plays into our personalities. I think I hit every point.
Yep,
Did I?
Yep,
all right, cool. All right.
I was also mentioning
real quick. I just want to respond to something from Rob. It's that when I watched his show before COVID, I always felt like I was watching from Dark Sakura's point of view. Like she was because that thing where he's talking about pointing, I always or you could see her legs like just off to the side a little bit. I always felt like I was her watching this conversation happening. And I always thought that was really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like a first person. Well, we don't want to say it's a first person shoot. Well, it's a first person perspective type of game. And it's fun.
Yeah. So we had another question from chat. Polar GTV has asked, if you have a guest on, you can edit the podcast. How do you handle a guest in a live stream? And I think, Bill, you do some guest stuff on your show. So I'll start this with you.
Well, actually, so Nintendo Switchcraft is a solo show. That's just me. And that's one of the reasons why I want to do it live, is because it gives me people to talk to. And then, because that's very much like the Bobby Blackwolf show. And then Stadia Cast is a duo show. So it's me and my co-host. We don't have guests on there very often. And if we do, like I had one of the higher ups at Google on the show to come and talk about Stadia. I did not do that live because I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't want to screw that up, so I just didn't do that one live. And then 143 Pixels, like that show is never live because that's a show where I interview people. I don't know what they're going to say. I like to have things be predictable. I also like to have things be family friendly, and I don't know what they're going to say ahead of time, so I don't do that stuff live. So typically when it comes to guests, I'm not live.
Ro, have you done any live guests or live interviews?
So we haven't done any live interviews yet on Black and Pat, but that is something that we want to do. So we have been having conversations for the last 2 months of how we want to do guest interviews and to have guest hosts come in, because a big part of what we're trying to do is to generate conversations. I can talk about my experience as a Black woman, but I can't talk about being autistic and what that representation is like. So we want to bring in other voices and other perspectives to talk about those things from authentic places. And so we've been talking about how we're going to do this live. And for us, it all kind of starts first and foremost with trusted sources to bring them in, because to Bill's point, if you don't know what somebody's going to say, or that you don't know that they will actually work within your ground rules for your channel, whether that be family friendly or authentic and honest, that's a really scary place to be, to have somebody on live that you don't know may put your channel or anything else at risk for what they're going to say. So for us, it really is kind of grounded in, we want to first start with our known quantities, the people that we have worked with in podcasts, that we have good relationships on a personal level from all these different places that we know and we trust. And then once we've kind of done a few of those and we have a good feel for it, the idea is to expand that out and to bring in other people, to have, again, more conversations. So that's kind of our approach right now, and we'll see how it goes.
So, Rob, I know because we've been live on internet radio the whole time, so this kind of can encompass that, not just video. But how do you handle doing interviews? And you've done some live and some pre-recorded, and why has that been?
Ro said a huge point. I'm just going to point and say that when she talked about trusted sources, that's a big part of the guests for us too. The upside, as if there is any, to this pandemic and doing the more distance recording is that it has lended itself more to incorporating guests. Like you might remember a couple of weeks ago, I invited one of my buddies on the show who's also a streamer because he had asked me such a good question during the week. I was like, you know what? I don't want to try to represent this for you. I want you to come on OLR and say this, so because we've always kind of prided ourselves on being in the same room and having that conversation with each other. But this situation has kind of forced us to take the more virtual approach. And I thought that worked very well. But Delvin is one of my BFFs, and I trust him. I know he's not going to come on my show and make a fool out of himself. We have had interviews as well. We've had musicians on the show, such as in our past, in the years, we've had Mega Ran, Christopher Tin, who did the music for Civ 4 and Civ 6, but these guys are professionals. They do interviews all the time. This is part of what they do to get the word out. I'm not worried about, they're probably just as nervous as I am in some ways, but they do a lot of this stuff all the time. Now, the other thing, and so Bobby, I have to kind of couple the next question with this because this is going to play into this. So Act Deft asked, like right after this in the chat, something that Run Jump Stomp said, it's good to hear criticism, but what about dealing with trolls and such? So this lends itself to the guests that we invite when we say we're going to take live calls. And trolls are going to happen.
Yep.
In the Twitch environment, trolls are going to happen. I'm a gay man. I have another female voice on the show. And unfortunately, that lends us sometimes to be targets for people to pick on us. And you know what? Even cis, het, white dudes, they're not immune to trolls coming into their space once in a while because people want to get a reaction out of you. And so my policy is I do not give them what they want. I don't give them that reaction. We had trolls that came into OLR with some real disgusting names and so forth, trying to light up our chat room a couple weeks ago. And you know what I did? I just turned off the little banner that started to show who was following and stuff. And I just kept right on going with the show while my awesome moderator team, including Bobby Blackwolf, took out the trash. And you're just going to have to sometimes roll with it. It's all about how you respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of the same for me. And what we do is that, I mean, you're not doing it right now because of social distancing, but I always have the opportunity and I try to pander like an AM radio talk show where I took live calls. And for about 14 years, I even had a toll-free number. You could actually call, and it was a Skype in number, so it worked with Skype, but you could pick up your phone and call in the show. And I would never know what's going to happen. And some people did get through that weren't appropriate for my show. And we can do this on Twitch now, and I could even show somebody's video, but I can be a little more selective now. We actually have a green room. We use Discord for this, and I say jump into this voice chat room called the green room, and that way I can see them, and then I can pull them in to another chat, and then we can have a conversation like that. And I never know what's going to happen. I don't know what they're going to be calling in about. And so if it's somebody I don't recognize, like not a long time listener to the show, I am probably a little bit closer to the disconnect or the mute button than I normally would be. And if they're sharing video and I've never heard of them before, I'm not going to show their video on the stream. But if it's somebody who's been listening for a couple of years, I will. And what's interesting also that I want to point out is I still edit my podcast. My podcast, the audio podcast, is probably about 5 or 6 minutes shorter than what you see live. And that's because I go through and I do all my podcast editing. And so if a guest accidentally, or if somebody named Loki accidentally breaches my, I don't like to curse on my show just because I view it as a challenge to get my words out without using 4-letter words.
Your house, your rules. You don't have to justify it.
But I can still beep it out on the podcast, and that's fine. So, I tell people you're listening to the unedited version. There's dead air. There's, probably some stuff that, tech difficulties, but they get edited out of the podcast. And so I actually have the best of both worlds. I have the live, and then if you subscribe to our channel on Twitch, you can see the live video. I don't edit that. And then the audio podcast goes out. So, even though our producer walked away for a little bit, he's back now and telling me that we need to wrap this up. So I'm going to have each person kind of say where they can find you and more about that. So Ro, let's start with you.
Awesome. So you can find me here on Twitch. I do a community night, the Wednesday Wind Down, from 7 to 9 Eastern on Wednesday on our channel, which is twitch.tv/blackandpat. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Black and Pat. Thanks for everybody that's followed us so that we could claim our names everywhere. You can also check out our website. We have more content is coming, which includes editorials and some personal pieces on our experiences. And guess what? That website is blackandpat.com.
Bill, where can we find you?
You can find me at runjumpstomp.com. It has links to all other things that that you might be interested. But what I really hope that you'll do is check out 143 Pixels. Season 4 just dropped, and it's got a ridiculously amazing guest list. So make sure that you check that out at 143pixels.com.
And then Rob.
Rob Roberts, my big show is Orange Lounge Radio, live Sunday nights at 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern at the Voice of Geeks Network, twitch.tv/VOG Network or vognetwork.com. Not this week, though, of course, because of DragonCon going on. But if you want to talk more personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Rob Roberts, Mr. Rob Roberts, or I also have a personal Twitch stream over just at Rob Roberts. My name was taken on Twitter, but not here on Twitch, so it's a little different.
And I am Bobby Blackwolf. My podcast is called The Bobby Blackwolf Show. You can find that on all the podcatcher things. It's been around a while, so everybody has gotten the feed, even if I didn't give it to them. And I am a co-founder and on the Voice of Geeks Network. So you can find out more information about that at vognetwork.com. I am live each and every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, right before OLR, over at twitch.tv/vognetwork. But you can also find me at Bobby Blackwolf just about everywhere: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and also we have our own Discord server, which also broadcasts when we go live, and we actually have text chat channels during the week, and that's where we pull our stories. So you can find out more information about that over at vognetwork.com. But that's it. That is all that we have here. Hey, coming up right next is, speaking of doing a podcast on video, What Game First, a board game podcast. And they're going to be talking about board games. And so stick around for that here on the DragonCon Digital Media Track. Thank you to all my panelists for coming here and accepting the invitation to be with me today. Thank you to all of you here on Twitch and on Future on YouTube for watching this panel. And hopefully we'll get to see you guys in person in 2021. So thanks so much, everybody. Everybody wave goodbye to the camera while the producer waves us off.
All right, thanks, everybody.